Hey everybody, I am here with Seth, aka Dopply. How you doing?
Pretty good. How you doing, Bob?
I'm doing good. We've talked a couple times before about some of your work, and I think now is definitely probably a better time because you have a bunch of cool stuff that you had done in the past, but you have something coming up that's pretty exciting as well. So, could you just kind of give everybody like a very short overview of what you do and some of the stuff that they have seen that certainly I've talked about on the podcast?
I'm a game developer somehow. And Before I started working on my latest project, which is Arzette, a spiritual successor to the infamous fantasy adventure games from the early it's the Zelda CDI games, and I did a fan remaster of those a few years back. Um, is both sort of a joke between friends and it's practice to make a real game, I guess you could say. But I've been dabbling in game development for, geez, I don't know how long, half my life at this point. uh, so yeah, that's sort of what I do. For RZ, I'm like the programmer, designer, creator, and I work with a lot of really cool people to make it happen.
So was the remakes, and I do, just to preface this, in this podcast, we're allowed to say the word Zelda. However, in your marketing materials, you are most certainly not. So
uh,
totally understandable.
Yeah, no, I'm getting used to. Yeah, I'm definitely getting used to that because during PAX, I had to explain to about 100 different people what the CDI was and and what the Zelda CDI games were. But a lot of people they were familiar with it, but still, I had to get good at that, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Well, so was that actually your first full game then, technically, the remake of those Zeldas?
The ones that are worth talking about, yes. I
Well, I mean, everybody's messed around with their own version of Snake or something like that. I'm just pulling a stupid example out of my head, but
No, yeah, that's right.
an actual game that you could play to completion that was based on something. I mean, was that actually your first full completed game like that?
Yeah, we'll say yes, because I had made smaller bite-sized projects like Snake, but not always just like and asteroids. Everybody does asteroids when they're messing around. Yeah, I'd say it's the biggest scope game that got sort of like attention, even though I didn't think it was going to get attention. But
And what drew you to those games? Was it the power of the Philips compact disc interactive multimedia system, or is it? I wish Hell was here to just pop up and make a comment for the moment. But I mean, honestly, what was it? Was it just something funny? Was it, what
S-
kind of made you do that?
so I was exposed to the Zelda CDI games the way a lot of other people were, which was the memes, the videos in 2007 or so, right? So that was like my first introduction to them, and it became a big thing between me and my friends on the internet. Um, so the remasters themselves, that it had already been like ingrained as a meme with me for a long time, and around the time that I started working on them, I think Twilight Princess HD was about to come out.
Mhm.
So we had the really funny idea of, well, what if we did that, but for the Zelda CDI games, or what if I did that? I started because I scope everything out exhaustively, ask anyone I work with, and I plan and scope, and I try to get everything like as marked down as possible. And I was like, I think I might be able to do this. Which, if you're a game dev, you're already listening to this and you're going, "Oh no, he doesn't know. He doesn't understand what he's in for." At that point, it's not.
Yeah.
It's never easy. But anyway, so I made like a proof of concept demo, like based on that, and because the I was actually going to do Hotel Mario first, actually, because I thought it would be an easier game, but the assets of the Zelda CDI games were more like available. Like they had already been the community had already sort of taken care of ripping all those assets and everything. So that's what I chose. So I made like a proof of concept demo, and I realized very quickly it was going to be a lot of work to do. Um but I tell you all this because the reason why I did it was because at first it was a joke, right? It's haha funny. But then, I had to do a lot more research, and I had sort of known because you may or may not believe this, but I'm a game history and retro game nerd.
Hmm.
Probably a little self-explanatory there, but um, I had looked into it, and there was this really amazing series of interviews that Hardcore Gaming 101 did with Dale Desharon, the original director of the CDI games, and a lot of other really formative games of that era, like Below the Root for the Commodore 64 and stuff. And just learning the story behind them and why they turned out the way they did, and like kind of they were dealt a bad hand. They could only do what they could. It was really inspiring. I kind of knew like the context behind why they were like so bad, and so I was like, well, okay, so you can make this silly project, but you can also like try to do what they were doing, but couldn't due to hardware limitations and everything out on budgets, time, all that other stuff. And it took me 4 years on and off because, it was a side it was a side thing. I was in the mortgage industry for a really long time, and that was sort of my side gig, was doing game development stuff. And, yeah, so, I canceled the project at one point. I was like, "Well, this is too much work for something very stupid," but, I picked it back up and somehow finished it, and that was sort of how it all went down.
That's pretty funny. I remember those games from when I was a kid. I remember hearing about them, and I remember talking to my cousin thinking, wow, can you imagine like a live action Zelda game? Like, how good would that be? Like, oh, we need to figure out how to get a CDI. And yeah, I could only imagine because I was pretty driven. I've always kind of been pretty driven. So I had set my sights on getting like a Genesis and a Sega CD. So I mowed lawns in the ghetto for all summer, which is hard because there's not much grass to mow, but
Yeah, in the
I
ghetto.
figured it out. Chasing down people to get my money was actually harder than mowing the lawns, believe it or not.
Oh,
But
my.
and I got those, and I probably could have just gone balls to the wall and got a CDI, but I'm so glad I didn't.
That's a
And
lot of money. Yeah.
was
You
a
put that.
lot of money in the game that I would have wanted to play was, of course, the Zelda games and Voyeur because I was like 11 years old. So
Oh,
of
yeah, of
course I wanted to
course.
see
Oh, like,
any chance of nudity, even partial, like
well
at 10 or 11. Come on,
well,
so that's all you're thinking about.
the CDI had you covered in spades then, if that's what you're looking for, because it's like seems to be a quarter of its library.
Yeah. So, but it is interesting because it was a little bit too much ahead of its time,
Mhm.
and it's because nowadays voice acting in a Zelda game is perfectly normal. So, but back then it was, it was something that's pretty. It was over the top, and holy crap, it did not did not execute it very well. But when you were remaking the games, I mean, obviously everything had to be done differently. You couldn't leave the crappy control scheme in there and all that. I mean, just why would anybody play it if it was still unplayable, basically? Were you thinking of trying to keep anything like true to the original, or were you just trying to say no, let's improve every aspect of it, but keep like the original style look to it, or what were you kind of thinking when you did all that?
So I definitely wanted to make sure that the overall design and feel was the same.
Mhm.
A lot of people were like, "Oh, you did this as like a preservation thing," and no, I would like to think that I'm that forward thinking and intelligent, but no. I mean, it was important that to me, the people who were, and by I say the people who were going to play, I literally thought a dozen of my very silly friends, and not all the people on the internet that did, but I thought that the people who would play it, they deserved to at least, if you played it on the CDI, the overall like, oh, the enemy placement, the like making the jumps, like all that stuff had to be the same. But like you said, the physics obviously got a huge overhaul. I mean, so much so that there's an item in Faces of Evil, which is like it allows you to traverse like giant jumps. It's like useless because the jump is so much better. So I had to like come up with different ways to like work around that. But it was very important to me that the games, like I said, if you were to play it on an actual CDI, you would be like, "Oh, okay." Like I understand like sort of the differences, I guess, like in how why one in way is one, one is the other. But yeah, the remasters are obviously on a totally, different like engine framework, everything. It's just trying to keep those things faithful, but also like feeling better to play, I guess would be it. But even still, because I do keep the design faithful, you're going to run into some questionable design things. I try to smooth over some of those things, but it's not Zelda CDI enhanced. It's Zelda CDI remastered. It's as you remember
Yeah.
it. So
What engine did you use to do this? Did you use like a pre-configured game engine?
yeah, it's Game Maker Studio too. I've been using Game Maker since I was 12, I guess. So it's like I'm sort of ride or die for Game Maker at this point. And yeah, I just
And
so,
Game Maker's not going to be charging you per installation
no,
for
they are
the
not.
first.
They are not going to be charging me per installation. Thank
Oh,
goodness.
we have had a year of some of the dumbest product launch customer or company changes in the
Yeah,
history of companies. That was definitely one for
I
the
feel
books. But
I feel for all the devs using Unity.
yeah.
And a lot of people I know personally are using it for their projects. So it stinks.
The
It's really
worst part
bad.
about that is it might actually have been an understandable idea, and I'm not saying it was, but it might have been, and it might have just been that they explained it really badly. And maybe it's still garbage, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe it actually would have only affected a very small percentage of people who sell or companies who sell tons of games. But that's why you always have to choose the correct marketing person to market your product. That's another hilarious thing we've seen this year. So it's yeah, it's that one. I just I felt bad for everybody that's getting hit with that, but I just also couldn't help laugh in like a sinister like when you see the hurricane coming towards you or the tornado and you're just like, I mean, I gotta laugh because what else am I gonna do?
Yeah. Uh, yeah, I mean, a rev share is one thing. It would still not be great. Nobody wants, like, if Game Maker came out like in a month and was like, "Yeah, you're gonna have to give us revenue share," and I'm like, "Well, then we're switching engines." But it
Mm.
would still be easier to understand than all the other stuff. But I won't go into the weeds on that right now. No, thank you.
So after those were released, did you get any pushback from Nintendo or anything like that? I can't imagine that you would have because it's not like you're taking money away from their franchises, or it's not like you're even selling it at that point either. So yeah, I couldn't imagine you getting much pushback from them. They also want to forget that those ever existed. So
No, I've never heard anything from Nintendo regarding the CDI remasters, and they know who I am. I'm a registered Nintendo developer, so they know who I am. But no, it's I took them down voluntarily because again, um, I didn't really want go out to I didn't set out to make a really popular fan game, basically.
mm,
I made a project for my dork friends and I, who also think that that kind of thing is amusing. And also to be like, wow, Seth finished a project for once, which, if you're a creative type, it's like, that's the best feeling in the world, finishing, like actually putting something out there. And that was one of the big motivators for doing the games. But no,
mm.
I just, I pulled them myself just because, I was like, well, especially if I want to do, real deal game development, which is kind of what I'm doing now. I don't really want to have that out there, I guess.
Yeah. Um, I mean, they're obviously still available though. You just didn't
Yeah,
have your web, so you're kind of got the you got the pass on that one, I guess.
I
Uh,
guess.
but what was the next project that you did after that?
So right after I finished the fan remasters, I had sort of been kicking the idea around of doing like a Zelda CDI like a spiritual successor, like, for a really long time.
Hmm.
Like, probably, I'm trying to think. Yeah, it's been a really long time because a lot of my aforementioned friends are helping me out on Arzette. Skipping ahead a little bit, spoiler. But there, a lot of them also were like, hey, it would be funny or it would be fun, not really funny, to work on a project like that. And yeah, I had sort of like thought about it for a long time, but especially during development of the remasters and everything else, I was just sort of like, okay. Um, but yeah, it was almost immediately after I finished those games. I sort of I had been kicking the idea of doing a spiritual successor around for a long time. My friends had encouraged me to sort of look into doing it because like it's a fun project that they also would want to work on, and I was like, okay. So like December of 2020, I started like making a design document, and like yeah, I was like, well, especially after like those games got as big as they were, I was like, okay, there's obviously people want more of this. I think maybe I actually don't know, but mostly just for me, I was like, all right, I'm gonna make this, I'm gonna do this game. So I wrote the design doc in December of 2020, and then I think in that January I announced that's what I was working on next, and that's sort of where the next bit of the story comes from. But we'll get to that.
No, I mean, so you've been focusing mostly on that for the past 2.5 years. I thought that you did one other project in between there as well.
Uh, no, I did a randomizer mod for my Zelda CDI remasters.
That's what I remember seeing pop
That
up.
was a
Okay, I
week.
knew I'd seen Dopply pop up at least one or two other times since then. So it's yeah, okay.
Yeah, that was a weekend project. That wasn't too much. It's a really bad randomizer, and I apologize to all the speedrunners out there. I tried, but I didn't want to devote a ton of dev time to it.
I mean,
Speed,
it seems like a fun thing anyway.
yeah,
So
speedrunners love those games a lot, and I love speedrunning, so I guess it all sort of works out.
nice. So where did you progress from there? You started the game and did you go all in? Did you quit your job and say, "All right, that's it. I'm going to be the Zelda CDI guy from
Oh
now on," or
God!
how did this all go?
Oh, what a curse! Quit my job to become the Zelda CDI guy. No,
Feel like that's Yahel's dream job, but continue.
yeah, no. I announced it, and a very nice Norwegian man appeared in my DMs shortly thereafter. Um, which, by the way, a lot of this stuff is crazy because I'm familiar with you, Bob. I was familiar with Audie. I was familiar with John. All these people because I watched all of your content because I was a very big fan because
Aw,
I'm a big dork. So
as are we.
yeah. So it's been very surreal in a whole lot of different ways. But anyway, Audie Surley appeared in my DMs and was like, "Wow, you." I believe his exact words were, "You madman,"
Yeah.
and 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 he sort of asked me like, because I publicly I needed some writers, right? Like, because I write okay, but Audie's a very good writer, and so he was like, I would like to help on this game. Like, this was him pre limited run. This is a long time ago.
Mhm.
Um, and so I was like, yeah, okay, sure. And then we decided to have a Discord call, and I did not understand that this was going to become a pitch meeting. It sort of was sprung on me out of nowhere. About midway through the call, I was like, "Is this a pitch meeting?" And then he was like, "Yeah, congratulations, you did great." But because I told him like what my goal for the project was, because I think he was scared, and I think a lot of people were scared that it was going to be a meme game, right? It was going to be a joke game. Like it was going to be something that like winked at the audience or sort of like, haha, look at what we're doing. And I made it very clear. I was like, no, if I do this project right, which this was again a long time ago, so I'm very happy I was able to do it right, so to speak. Um, the goal was we're going to make a third one of those games. Like if Animation Magic lost the license to Zelda and they wanted to make another game in that style, and it was released for the CDI 2 that looked more like a Saturn game, then this would be it. Like those are all like my sort of like design pillars. Like it has to be the same sort of sincere, um, somewhat cheesy writing, but you don't write for cheese. You just write it sincere and kind of goofy, and you kind of go from there. And you make it the same art style and stuff, and it'll be like a third one of those. And yeah, he was totally on board. And then he was like, "I'm not going to do an audio voice on the podcast, but I do in private, just like he does a voice for me." He thinks I sound like a cowboy because I'm from Kentucky, so even though I don't have like a huge accent, he's still like, "Hi, partner," like every single time he like talks to me. So,
Yeah, you definitely
but
don't sound like that.
no, but I do in his voice. But anyway, he was like, "All right, well, I'll write for you. I'll be your producer. You know, let's make this happen." So, we reached out to. Well, I did a lot more development first. Again, this was a side gig. I did not quit my job to become the Zelda CDI guy. This was a side thing that I did for a long time. I just kept prototyping, iterating. It eventually got to a point where we were going to sit down with a publisher, and then Adi actually was between publishers, and he gave me some between jobs, and he gave me some of his severance money. He would kill me if I didn't mention this. It seems to be something that he loves. He loves to mention uh, in order to sort of finance a vertical slice, like to pay for animation and actual like sort of like make the slice kind of look sort of how Arzette looks now.
Mhm,
And we got it in front of a few publishers. It didn't go super well, but so I was going to go to Kickstarter at that point. So we were preparing for that. Um, and so I visited Limited Run because that was Audie's new job. He's able to get me a meeting with Josh. And I was going to pitch just doing a physical version of the game because, Kickstarters have physical versions and you want somebody reputable to sort of like handle that, right?
mhm.
So yeah, I was doing that, and then Josh asked, "Why don't we just do this game?" Because he saw the work in progress shopkeeper scene, which maybe someday other people will see because it's
Mhm.
voiced by me and it looks really funny. But he saw that and he was like, "Oh man, I think we want to do this game." And so yeah, that's sort of how that all happened. Then I was like, okay, still didn't quit my job, even though I really very much wanted to. It's still going to be a side thing. But I was lucky enough. This is a joke. I was lucky enough that in the summer I got laid off from my other job, so it became a sort of like, okay, well, I could look for another job, or if this deal goes through that we're discussing, um, maybe I could make this my full time career doing independent game development. And yeah, that's what happened. I
So I
sort of
feel
just
like
went
that's
for it.
exactly the same moment as when you were like, "Oh, okay, I think I could do these CDI remakes. It shouldn't be too hard." I feel like it's the same thing 'cause,
It's yeah, no, it's very accurate.
yeah.
Yes. Oh yeah, no, it's no big deal. Yeah, it's a big
The only
deal.
thing harder than trying to figure out how to run your own business and get yourself paid that way is dealing with everybody who has an opinion about that. That's, uh
Very
that's one
relatable.
where it's I'm, mouthy, in case you couldn't tell. It's
A
real
little,
hard to
a
keep
little
my
bit.
mouth shut in those situations, and yeah, that's a frustrating one, so I wish you all the luck with that 'cause, chasing your dreams is more hours than any job you've ever worked before, ever,
you,
and not even remotely close to what you would expect.
you got that right. A warning to all who are interested. But no, I knew I would regret it if I didn't at least try to sort of go for it. Like okay,
Yeah.
I'm 30 years old, so yeah, it was sort of like a moment where I was like, okay, I'm going to I'm gonna go for this thing that I've always wanted to do. I have this opportunity. It's with a very silly project, very silly game, and even if things somehow don't work out 100% the way that I want them to, I'll have at least uh, done chased the dream, like you said, for a little bit. So,
Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely worth it to me, both for that and the band stuff that I did. Because even though the first album came out sounding like the most expensive demo ever, it came out,
yeah,
which how many people started bands, wrote a bunch of songs, and actually got to the point where they released an album and were talking about touring, and it's like 1% of anybody that's ever been in a band before, so it's
right,
mostly people sitting around drinking, smoking weed, talking about being in a band, which I like those things very much, but those are separate.
right,
Music is music, those things are those things that they don't normally cross until afterwards. So
right.
yeah, but hey, so where are you at now then? What's the point that the game is in now? Are there demos out? What platforms? Like, let's talk about where the game is now, because we got the backstory, and I think people are probably going to be excited to see what this thing's all about.
Yeah. So as far as development goes, we are very. I say we. I mean, it is we. It's me doing all the nuts and bolts stuff, and then a bunch of artists, and obviously Audie and John from Digital Foundry, and a bunch of other collaborators, sort of helping out. But we're almost done.
Hmm.
Um, right now, we're just we're heading towards the finish line. I don't have a release date that I can say at the moment, but I will say that it is one of those times where it is frustratingly close to being done. Where you just have to. It seems like the end is in sight. You just got to keep running towards it to sort of like you know tie everything
Mm.
together. But it's coming out on PC through Steam, Nintendo Switch, PS4, PS5, Xbox Series. So it's coming out on almost everything. Yeah.
That's very cool. Now, when you're talking about a game like this, that's, I guess, modeled after the 32-bit era, let's just say, right? Like the Sega
Hmm.
Saturn-esque PlayStation type of graphics.
Right.
Do you find any trouble porting it between these modern platforms? Or is it like the Switch version is going to run absolutely identical to the other versions? Or.
I've had to do some work to get some things working the way that I want
Hmm.
on some platforms or the other. I won't be specific. Switch, but
Yeah, we all know. We all know
but
which one
the
you're talking about.
no, I chose to get very technical and nerdy for your listeners. I chose
Hell yeah.
a 360p base canvas resolution, 640 by 360. It's actually quite high res for a lot of pixel art games, technically, but I wanted to be able to sort of like so the backgrounds are all hand painted, right? Just like the original games, they are all individually hand painted and then sort of like uh, squished down for the resolution. It was
Mhm.
important to me that there wasn't a mishmash. I think people call that the pixel grid. We didn't want to have like high res 1080p backgrounds and then sprites on top, or at least I never want that. I hate that look. So I wanted to make sure that that was like congruent. But yeah, it's pretty high res for this type of like pixel art game. But that's evenly integer scaled to all major widescreen resolutions, like 1080p, 4K, 720p, which is perfect for all the platforms that this is going to. But yeah, no, it was Game Maker makes it very easy to sort of port around to other platforms. You have to work around their quirks, but if you're making a 2D pixel art game, Game Maker is pretty great for that. It's very performant and it's very much based around like because I do like per pixel calculation for everything. I do like run ahead per, and it's really good for that. So
Oh, wow. Okay. So that's very cool. So 360, I mean, this is a very dumb question, but I'm going to ask anyway. I'm assuming 360 at 60 frames per second.
oh
Do
yeah.
you have like a crazy 120 frame per second mode for the latest edition consoles, or are you just sticking with the 60 and not messing around with silliness?
So by the time I had thought about doing Delta Time, and trust me, again, I've got John Linneman from Digital Foundry as a big part, a good friend and collaborator. So trust me when I say like all technical options have must be exhausted, lest I feel his wrath. No. Um, so delta time is what lets you decouple frame rate from physics simulation
Mhm.
and timers and all that other stuff. And by the time I was deep in the project, it was too late to sort of do that. I'd already chosen the base frame rate is 60 frames per second. So if I go over that or below, it'll run too fast or it'll run too slow if I change that at all. I did experiment with it a lot, but it had to be from scratch if I wanted to do like a high frame rate mode or something like that. So
Mm.
nope, it's just it'll be appropriately HD on all platforms and 60 frames per second.
Very cool. So that's kind of funny though. So if it's at 360, that means if you set your if you hook up your Switch to the upcoming RetroTink 4K, you could drop
Can't
the
wait.
resolution back down to 360 and let that scale it up with the CRT filter, so it would actually look basically like this was a Sega Saturn game running on a well, if you're using the Tink 4K, that means you're probably going to look like it's running on a BVM or something.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's pretty funny. That's I love it. Absolutely love it.
yeah. That's kind of how I play my CDI now. Is I am when it comes to scalars and playing retro stuff, I'm what you might be called economical. I am very. I was like, well, I want quality, but I'm also a very cheap person. So
GBS control.
no, no, not that cheap. No, I use an
Oh, I love it. I'm not saying that as an insult. You get that crappy GBS board, you put Rama's
yeah,
amazing software on it, and poof, you have yourself an awesome scaler.
very true. Very true. No, I use for a very long time. I use the RetroTink 2X
Hmm.
to connect the CDI because it's the easiest way for me to just sort of get in and out for composite. I do have a
There's nothing wrong with that. Zero lag, so you're winning. You know, the only thing you could do is make it look a little bit better, but who
for a long
cares, right? At that point, as long as it's not destroying the experience with adding 7 frames of lag or something, you're good to
right
go.
for a long time. I used a European. I my first CDI that I bought it right before I did the CDI remasters because I was like, well, I've always wanted one, so I'm just gonna go for it. So back then, I think I bought it in like 2015 or 2016. They were still expensive, but not what it is now. So I imported one from Europe for like $150, and I did a region swap mod. Very easy. One of my I just started getting into modding at that point. I'm
Mhm.
much better now, but back then it was pretty easy. You just sort of it's not true 60 hertz. It's like 59 point. No, it's not. I don't even think it's 59. It's very. If you were to look at it on a CRT, it looks kind of messed up, but it's good enough. And it was RGB out of a CDI because you could just use the SCART connector on the back for like
Yep.
it was just already all ready. So I did that for a long time, but that CDI is dead now. May it rest in peace. So
Aw.
I have a I have a 450 that a member of the community offered to me for a very good price. So I took him up on that, and yeah, I still need to do a proper RGB mod, but I just that kind of stuff is more time than I have now. So it's on the back
Yeah.
burner. I have
But
a
the
clock.
450s have, wait, do those have S-video out or are those only composite out?
I believe it's only composite out, but guess what? This one's European too. So I'm just
Okay.
I'm just going to do an RGB mod on it when I get the time, and also have to do a well, the clock, the timekeeper mod's already been done on it. That's one of the
Ugh,
reasons why I wanted
yeah.
it. Yeah, thank goodness because the other CDI that was not easy to do that on. Um,
For anybody that's not sure what we're just talking about now, the timekeeper is a chip that keeps the time, except you would think that the chip and the battery are separate, but the battery is inside the chip. And
mhm.
yes, you could get replacement timekeepers, but they're all new old stock, which means their batteries are probably dead too. So you have to very carefully Dremel off the top of this chip around the exact spot that the battery's in, and then remove the battery and have that there. So yeah, it is as much of a nightmare as it sounds. I didn't even do mine. I had my friend Jose do it for me because I'm smart enough to know I would screw that up. So I just paid him to do it. But yeah,
Yep.
that's whew.
It also smells very bad when you do it because, like, the hot, like, a PCB chip after you Dremel, it's terrible.
Yeah.
I would not recommend anybody to do that mod. Just send it to the professionals.
That sounds like we need a homebrew solution. We need like a super cheap FPGA to just replace the timekeeper, and then we have a little battery module, and just put it on a board with the same pin out, so we could just drop our own in and make it easy to. And even if the battery's got to be smaller to compensate, at that point, whatever. If you got to swap a battery every year versus, yeah, that's we should work on that
Oh,
CDI
yeah.
community. Why haven't we done that
Well,
yet?
there's
Is
already
there
an
something?
ODE, so you might as well go to the next step and do all the rest of the stuff, so
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to trying Fixel's ODE, and I
oh,
have one of the big tank ones, like the one John holds his PVM up with, so it would definitely have enough room to fit the ODE and the original disc, so I could hear the disc spin on my original copy of Thunder in Paradise, but when I want to try out
yeah.
something awful like Mutant Rampage Body Slam or something, I could just use the ODE.
Awesome. Yeah.
Um, all right, so we kind of jumped around, which I don't mind. I have ADHD, so I could follow. Hopefully, everybody listening isn't rolling their eyes like, "Here we go again, Bob. What are you going to talk about randomly next that doesn't fit?" But so you're on all the major platforms. You're nearing completion, but you're not sure where yet. Did you end up doing some kind of pre-order system? Are you going to have a pre-order? Or are you just going to launch the game when it comes out?
Uh, we'll have details about that closer it is to launch. I can't really say
That's cool.
anything at the moment, but yeah.
No, I mean, that's totally understandable. You don't wanna blow any surprises before it's ready, so I get it, but, are there any hidden jokes or any funny stuff in there? Is there, like, a shop where you could buy a timekeeper mod, or is there, like, something very stupid and CDI related that for us hardcore fans, or anything buried in there?
Yes. That's all I'll say.
Awesome. No, I don't wanna know. I don't wanna spoil the surprise, but, if there were anything that you maybe forgot to put in, I would say hold off on the 120 frame per second
Oh
mode
my
and put in a
god.
couple of CDI jokes.
But yeah, I tried not to go too reference heavy, both in the writing and just otherwise. But yeah, I know what kind of game I'm making, so got to indulge a little bit, right? Just a little
Yeah.
bit.
I always really appreciate those jokes too, where if you don't know what the joke is, it still kind of fits the dialogue. So if you have no clue what they're talking about, you still might chuckle, but people who get what they're talking about will get a big chuckle out of it because
Right.
and then you chuckle even harder because you're like, I wonder who people who didn't get the joke think happened there. And
Yeah.
I like it's really hard to pull that off, and very few people get it right. So hopefully, I'm sure it's going to be fine though. It's you obviously get to see and get your audience. So
I mean, I also have Audie, so he sort of keeps me in line. And if you know how he is, then you'll know sort of how the he and I have a very remarkably similar sense of humor, so that helps tremendously. And again, we have a very like the way that scenes were written. Like we very much were like, oh yeah, no, no, we get it. Like so we both bounce off each other very well, but yeah, so you have if any of you out there were concerned, don't worry, there's a community seal of quality there to make sure everything is in line and up to the quality standards that you would expect.
yeah. What's the expected completion time for a game like that, or is that not something you want to talk about yet until it's released?
Like, just total, like, development time, like, how long it should
No,
take.
like from a player point of view. But I do want to talk
Oh,
more on the dev stuff. But because when you walk into a
okay.
game, it's really hard to see. Like you go to that website, how long does it take to complete? And
Yeah.
it gives you a sense. But like I think the first time I played A Link to the Past, I probably spent 25, 30 hours on it. I was a kid too.
Mhm.
But the last time I played it, even though it had been years since I played anything other than the main scene so I could do all my stupid comparison shots with, past that I hadn't really played the game in years, and I think I beat it in 8 hours or something like that. So, it, you know, i- is that the same kind of feel where it's a game that you could explore around, so you might take a longer period of time? Was there a set thing that I mean, do you think about these things when you're making it, or is it just like what's your thought on all that stuff?
I think every developer, especially nowadays, it's about all they think about is game length and being extremely nervous that it is either too short or too long. Um, and that's something that I talked with John a lot about because, obviously he's like a proponent of like sort of shorter, more like manageable games, and or he's more about the game should be as long as it needs to be,
Right.
and not any longer. And I would say that sort of applies to Arzette. So this is the way, just to get into the woods of the game a little bit. It's a action platformer. Like the whole the design philosophy was, let's take the general game loop of those original games and like make it as good as it can possibly be, follow it to its most natural conclusion. Like, because you collect items, power ups, and stuff, then you go back through levels you've unlocked and you kind of find new paths and stuff. And then John just summarizes it with, "Oh yeah, like Monster World." And I was like, "Well, I guess so." I get, like, I didn't realize that's what I was making, but then after real, I was like, "Huh." Or then a ton of people have been like, "Oh, Shantae," and I was like, "Well, yeah, but those are just Monster World games too, sort of." But yeah, no, that's sort of as far as playtime length. That's kind of what you're looking at, especially with. I don't want to give an exact hour count. I know some. I'll toss
Oh, and
out
I
like
wouldn't ask for that anyway, but I just meant, like, is this a game where we're gonna have to put 100 hours in to, to
no.
complete it, or yeah.
No, it depends on the player too. Which was great about demoing the game live was sort of seeing like player reactions and seeing if I had tuned the difficulty correctly, which it seems like I did. Like, it's a lot of people were like, "Oh, it's retro," and I was like, "Well, no, there are no lives for one, so that's definitely not super retro." But like, you will die a lot until you learn what you're doing, and it checkpoints you between each room. So like you're sort of like figuring out the room and the enemy placement and stuff, and you might die a little bit on the way because much like the Zelda CDI games, Arzette doesn't, in the normal mode, doesn't have health drops or health refills unless you get an item to do that. So you're sort of like trying to platform, make your way through, avoiding enemies, killing enemies, losing health on the way until you get to like to the next area. So um, so I would say, like the length of both of the original games combined was sort of the scope I was going for because there's, that a lot of cutscenes and you know, several worlds, but just the sort of like, all the artwork that we're doing for the game and all, like I said, the cutscenes and stuff, there's only so much of that you can reasonably do, right? And
Hmm.
even taking that out of account, to me personally, those type of games that are like sort of exploration based and kind of like technically linear action platformers, even though it has a lot of non-linear aspects, I think they get old if they stretch on for too long. Like, someone says, "Oh, this Metroidvania is 20 hours." I'm like, "Oh god." Like, I prefer mine to be like maybe 6 hours long tops. And I do my yearly Super Metroid runs. It's about how long it takes me, or 5 hours. So, but no, like someone's like, "This Metroidvania is 40 hours long," and I'm like, "Oh no, that's too much.
Yeah.
That's way too much." So yeah, that's sort of where we're at. So I just tell people, however long it took you to beat the original games, just double that. That's probably how long Arzette will be for you.
I agree that a game should be as long as it should be, and I've never said a game was too short in a negative way. I've said that, like, "Oh, I wish I wanted to keep playing. I wish the game didn't end," but
Hmm.
that's more like a movie that you don't want to end. But if that movie that was 2.5 hours long was 4.5 hours long, you'd be like, "This movie's too freaking long." So
Right.
it's good leaving people wanting a little more, but there
Hmm.
was and I know people disagree with me when I say this, but I remember playing Skyward Sword, and it was the first 3D Zelda I'd really sat and played since, Ocarina, which I never even beat that, and all it was part of my childhood where I was starting to get old enough to be paying attention to slightly different things at the time anyway. But I remember I liked Skyward Sword a lot until it hit a point where it was like, okay, now go back to every world again to collect something that has nothing to do with the plot of the game. Don't really even get power ups. It was a total fetch quest that was obviously put there just to make the game longer. And I'm like, what the hell am I doing? Why am I wasting, like, I am an adult with shit to do. Why am I sitting here collecting orbs or whatever the hell it
Yeah.
was? It's not even, there's nothing good even happening. And it was only like 3 hours tops to get all that done, even if I was, dying and just exploring a little bit myself. But it just annoyed me. That absolutely annoyed me. That stuff like that should be optional. Hey, if you want to, a glowing gold sword, go through all of this stuff, or an extra heart or something. I think that's really cool when people add that to their games. But
Mhm.
if you just want to get into the story and kind of explore and then beat the game, that shouldn't be a requirement. And so yeah.
Yeah, I tried to there's a ton of side side quests, I guess you could call it. I guess that's the new nomenclature, but um, there's a ton of optional stuff to do, and I've crammed a lot of unlockables, and like tried to make the replay value pretty high. And yeah, I don't want anybody to feel like they're playing Skyward Sword when they play my game. I'll just say that. I jokingly said I'd rather play my remasters than that game ever again at one point, and it may have not been so much of a joke. Oh no,
Yeah.
that game is okay, but
It wasn't bad at all, but that did piss me off a lot. And luckily, I was at the time I was working for a company, and they had this thing where every morning at 8 o'clock, we would 8 or 8:30, we would have this meeting,
mhm.
and it would sometimes go to noon, and I was needed for about 7 to 10 minutes of it, but I had to be on,
Yeah.
and if I dug deep into work, then when they asked me my turn, I would have no idea what they were talking about. So I played Skyward Sword every morning during those meetings because I could kind of do all like the fetchy stuff
Mhm.
and yeah, so that's the only reason I was able to get through all that. But
Wow.
yeah, that was the dumbest waste of money ever. Well, the lead developer had a meltdown one day, and I had to mute from laughing because he was like, "What are we doing? What is the point of this? We get on the first hour is Mitch talking about his back or his air conditioner or something. Anyway, what the hell? Come on, what are you?" Oh man, it was
Oh god.
glorious,
Yeah.
absolutely glorious.
Oh, that's excellent.
But hey, if it wasn't for that job, there would be no retro RGB, and I would have never started a band. So thank God for people who pay well for wasted time, because there's so much of that.
Yeah. Yep.
Um, so I guess as we're winding this down, is there anything you want people to know going into it? And an example that I'll use, and I'm not comparing the games at all, but when I first started to play Axiom Verge, the first 20 minutes, I was like, what am I doing? Like, I don't even like this. I'm dying all the time. I don't get to blast through anything, but I stuck with it. And all of a sudden, it clicked and I loved it. And I played it. I think I've played it to completion twice, and I've played the sequel. And I'm very much looking forward to the third whenever Tom's done with it.
Mm.
Um, but the advice I would give is if you know that you like a Metroidvania style game, just stick with Axiom Verge. Give it at least an hour or two, and you'll probably love it. But I understand how some people at first might be like, "I die every 5 feet. What the hell?" But do you have anything like that going into it, or is it just if you like older, games that are inspired by that era, with a modern twist, you're probably going to be fine.
Yeah. So I think Audie said it really well. That and it totally applies to like my design philosophy for the game. People would joke about the CDI, which fair, totally fair. But it sort of represented like the dream for like the next generation of video games we never really got. Like multimedia interactive media, like all the FMV stuff, and a playable film, like all these things that like sound really good, but they just could not execute well back then due to the technology they had. So that like, and it's very much like a blue sky, like man, the possibilities, right? So like,
Mm.
I really wanted Arzette to sort of harken back to sort of that sort of oh anything is possible, but we're trying to get there, but using the limitations of the time, like how the cutscenes look the way that they look, right? Like that's very much intentional. But like, what if the gameplay was better? Like, what if the hardware was better? So, if my advice would be explore a lot, because the game, it definitely is very encouraging you to explore. You will be rewarded. And yeah, just sort of, I like the stick with it sort of example you gave, because it will be difficult. It would be very difficult for some people. I've tried to balance it for everybody. It's nice when I see like uh, people who play who are like very much like, oh yeah, no, this is a retro game. I know what I'm doing, and they sort of like go to town on it. And then some, I've seen, a lot of younger people. I saw a lot of kids play the game when I demoed it
Mhm.
last, and that was, for one, very rewarding. Sort of a very life fulfilling sort of moment. Like, okay, good. Like this is sort of what I wanted to go for, but they were still getting it. My wife, she doesn't really like 2D games very much. She's more of a PC gamer, 3D sort of like, likes more, not the older stuff. But I try to balance it so that even when she begrudgingly picks it up and plays
Hmm.
it, she'll be like, "Okay, I'm having a good time." It's hard, but it's not impossible, right? Like it's a good challenge. So I would just advise people, like, sort of try to pick up on the enemy patterns and placement, and it's not as hard as it seems. Again, once you go to the next area, you'll checkpoint, so it's like you're just slowly trying to inch forward and get to your goal or your item or whatever, and just explore a lot. That would be my overall advice as the game's designer, I guess.
Okay. Well, I mean, that makes sense. And, just, I guess, understand what game you're playing. You're
Hmm.
not playing Call of Duty,
No, yeah.
which is nothing wrong with that game. I'm
Right.
just, know what you're getting
Exactly.
into with
Kind of
it,
know what you're getting into, but I did try to make the game for everybody, or not, and not everybody. A game for everybody is bad. Let me rephrase that.
Mm.
I made the game for me. I made it for somebody who was into the aesthetics and sort of like the gameplay idea of the original games, but like wanted an actual like good game. So, but I wanted it for people who had no context of the CDI games. They just see like a hand painted action platformer with really nice pixel graphics and very silly cutscenes, and they can hopefully like get a lot out of it still. So I think anybody who likes more retro, sort of throwbacky games like that, but again, a lot of there wasn't like a conscious like decision, because I see that a lot, right? Like where people want to make like, okay, this is going to be retro, this is going to be this way, but that's kind of not like how I approached it. I approached it more as of, this design is what it is. These are like the limitations I want to try to adhere to, but I'm not like beholden to them, and I want to sort of explore the best version of those limitations of this game, and that's sort of the game that I think I made.
Awesome. I got to ask before we go, did you ever consider putting like CRT filters in as a video option?
Hey, guess what? No comment.
Okay. 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 My only comment on that is, do it right or don't do it at all. It's really silly when I see these games that draw horizontal lines across the screen that don't even match the lines in which they're scaled from the original resolution. It's kind of unless that's the joke, in which fine,
Well,
but no one's actually going to use it that way. So
all I'll say is that I've seen a lot of comments on the internet that have said something to the effect of, "I would like to be able to play this game in a mode to where it looks like I am playing on a Philips CDI." And to all that I have to say is knowing smile. That's it.
okay, okay. Well, this was very fun. I'm really looking forward to the game. I was looking forward to the game before this, but now after having this conversation, I'm really, really looking forward to the game. I will hopefully be buying a physical copy of it, and
Mhm.
I guess we got time for one more question here.
Of
Since
course.
this is something that you're probably going to be releasing a physical version of, I'm just assuming
Yes.
based on the company you're going through.
Mhm.
How are you planning the whole software update versus cartridge thing? Because in a perfect world, in a world where we could all fly first class for the same price as coach, the physical copy would be the final version. But
Mhm.
how the hell are you going to do that? Because you can't do that. Then you would have to force everybody to buy it twice or not have physical on launch. So that's not possible. But, how do you find the balance for that?
So, and what I'm doing right now, I am trying very hard to make sure that the version that appears on the cartridge will be it. Obviously, I can't legally and just for personal reasons. I can't like personally like guarantee that 100%. But that is what
Sure.
I'm going for. Is I want that version that ships on cartridge to be like the most complete that I possibly can get. As far as release timing, yeah, I can't really speak on that. That's sort of
Okay.
going into dangerous territory.
No,
But
that's fine.
yeah, no, that's sort of how I've approached the whole thing. I want to ship a completed game that's like totally polished. I know it's like an impossibility. Trust me. Even with my last game, I was like, okay, this is or the remaster project. I was like, okay, this is like super good. There's nothing wrong with it. And then yeah, I've watched hundreds of people stream it at this point, and then they come across something that they don't perceive as a bug, but I see it and I just want to die. So I was like, well, no, it's probably going to need patches, but no, it's difficult to want to get to that. And my hope is that when you do put the cartridge in, which I'm very happy that there's going to be a physical version because I've become very much a fan of physical media more and more. And I mean, how can I not? Again, I'm good friends with John. You can't hang
Right.
around that guy without wanting to buy every game around you. Uh, on put it on your shelf. But yeah, no, I'm super, super lucky and grateful and happy that I get to work with Limited Run and that they are going to do a really cool physical edition.
Mhm.
Uh, really cool physical editions. Can't wait to talk more about that. And that my hope is that the version that you get, no matter what, even if you get the digital version, it'll all be awesome, ready to go.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your time. I'm excited for this. Obviously, we're gonna be pimping it on RetroRGB as
Oh,
soon as there's a release to it.
it's
It was gonna
awesome.
happen before this interview anyway, but like I said, this is gonna be even more fired up for it. So, I appreciate your time.
Of
Obviously, I'm gonna have
course.
links to all of your stuff in the description, and we will definitely be following up after the game is released. So, thank you very much, Seth.
Awesome. Thank you for your time. I appreciate the interview.